God said you would do this, and he said you would rebuild Jerusalem. And Cyrus did. And remember we looked at that Cyrus cylinder? So we have a historical record, 2 historical records outside the Bible, and we have physical evidence of it happened. And that's just phenomenal. And because of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we know that Isaiah, when he wrote those things, it was definitely predating when it actually happened. That's amazing. This isn't the only prophecy in the Bible where God calls someone out by name, but it's the only one that we have like physical evidence that it happened. So it's just really cool. We also called attention to in China, where they study the stars, and they saw the darkness, and they knew this is not right. It's not the right lunar cycle for an eclipse. What's going on? And the emperor decreed the sins of the people are all on one man, and the emperor proclaims forgiveness to all under heaven. And you know how it's just amazing that they thought that. But we talked briefly. Genesis, the book of beginnings. It holds the key to so many things that we see in our world, does it not? Even 7 days a week. You don't even have to believe the Bible to observe that that's true. Read the book of Genesis, and you will see that you can see so many things. The flood, even though many scientists try to argue against it, every continent on earth, there's people groups, they have stories of global flood. And even, you know, we could talk about current events right now, but the hatred that we see over there between Israel and others in that area, so it dates back to, we trace the origins back to the Bible. A lot to do with this man, who was Abraham, who was the father of Isaac and Ishmael. We talked about that the story of Abraham sacrificing Isaac was so profound, so articulately foreshadowing what would happen to Jesus, that it's just only the Bible, only God could do that, only God could orchestrate that. And I love this from D.L. Moody's book, Wade and Wanting, the Muslim who examined the 10 Commandments and said, this is perfect. You know, this could only come from God. And the law that God gave Israel elevated them from an ignorant, unenlightened people, advanced them far above the Greeks and the Romans and, the places where you think of enlightenment. The laws that God gave elevated them far beyond the enlightenment of the ages, as it says here. Okay, so we also looked at a number of archaeological finds that support the historical accuracy of the Bible, and those are pretty interesting. Okay, so now we're ready to move on. I love this picture. I look at it and I see the Garden of Eden. Okay, maybe not, but look, there's a tree of life, and that white sycamore in the background. If Naomi was here, she might tell me it's a river birch. They look similar. I don't know. But anyway, it looks dry as dead bones, doesn't it? I just see those two trees, and I see there's the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Pursuit of knowledge as an end for itself is kind of like dead bones. But the tree of life. So I love that picture. So that's what we're going to use kind of as our background tonight. But I'm going to show a little video for you. This guy's name is Pete Holmes. This came across my Facebook feed. Don't go looking for him necessarily on YouTube or YouTube or Netflix or anything, because he's not particularly clean. But this is cleaned up. But it'll surprise you.
Some people think God created the universe. Some people think nothing created the universe, which is the funniest guess. And the nothing people make fun of the God people. They say God doesn't exist. I'm like, okay, maybe. But you know what definitely doesn't exist? Nothing. That's the defining characteristic of nothing. is that it doesn't exist. So what are we talking about? Either you think it's God, something you can't see, touch, taste, photograph, and science can't prove, or you think it's nothing, something you can't see, touch, taste, photograph, and science can't prove. But I think we can all agree, if your nothing sometimes spontaneously erupts into everything, that's a pretty magical nothing, you guys. And ask the nothing people, what happens when you die? They'll tell you, nothing. You go into nothing. I'm like, you mean you merge back with your creator? That's heaven.
That's pretty humorous, but it's also pretty insightful. Pretty good. Okay, so creation testifies of its creator. Just as in the world of art, the masters are recognized by their brush strokes, not by me. I won't know that. I could tell the difference between Picasso and some of the others because he's kind of out there. But those who understand such things and are experts in that field can tell the difference, they say, between Rembrandt and Da Vinci. And you know, that's just amazing that they can do that. But in the same way, creation is going to have God's fingerprints all over it, if you'll look. So, and we have this verse from Scripture: the heavens are telling of the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of His hands. And I keep using the Bible as evidence, and that's because when I started, that was the first thing I covered, because I know I'm going to use the Bible as evidence. And how do you use the Bible as evidence for God? It's like source-based evidence, it's like. So I tried to establish that the Bible is so proven that it has to be from outside this world, even as from D.L. Moody's, the law, even the law, the Ten Commandments, he concluded, this has to be from God, from heaven itself. So I'm still using the Bible as supporting evidence, but I'll explain. Interesting note about astronomers. What do I mean by that? Okay, so one thing I haven't done, but I've been kind of tempted to do, is to start talking about the hundreds, if not thousands, of very intelligent atheists who set out to prove that God, they got tired of hearing it from their friends and loved ones, Jesus, and it's like, I'm going to prove to you once and for all that God is not real, the Bible is just a book. And when they set out to prove that, they realize this is real. Like the homicide detective I told you about, J. Warner Wallace. When he read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John as an atheist, he said, these are perfect eyewitness accounts. They're true accounts. They witnessed the same thing. It struck him that way. But you know what I found? Of those lists of people who came to believe in God after being atheists and agnostics, astronomers were heavy on the list. There was a surprising number of astronomers. But I guess it shouldn't be surprising when the Bible says the heavens are telling of the glory of God. So if that's your business to look at stars, you should be seeing the glory of God, and great many of them did. So that's why that's there. Another verse I want to use real quickly. For what may be known about God is plain to them, the world, because God has made it plain. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from His workmanship, so that men are without excuse. And I've always loved that verse. It's kind of a framework verse for me. So God's fingerprints are all over creation. My former pastor, Pastor Bud, wanted to be a doctor at one time, and he was so astounded. When he would learn things about the human body, he would be just astounded, because he would see, man, this lines up with Scripture, and he would be wondering, how can doctors not all be Christians? Because it's just there. Okay, diversity of life. That's one thing we're going to look at just briefly. What do I have here? I think I have pictures. Can you see that? That's called a Venezuelan poodle moth. It looks funny, looks fluffy like a stuffed animal or something, but it's strange, kind of strange looking. That one is known as a blue dragon. Its official name, you wouldn't be interested in. We struggle to pronounce it, so I cut it off. The blue dragon. Do you see where these would come from in evolution? It's like I don't remember them being on any of those little charts, you know. To me, they speak of a creative God. The blobfish. There's several fishermen in here. You ever pulled one of them up? Yeah, I bet you'd throw it back. The sea pig. I'm not eating that bacon. What's that say? A Dumbo octopus. Who wouldn't want a Dumbo octopus? It's kind of cute looking, kind of, sort of, maybe. I don't know. But I like this guy, a bombardier beetle. One of his defense mechanisms is to shoot flaming gases out its butt. So in evolution, why didn't we all get to retain that? And, you know, it's like maybe some of us have, I don't know. Depends on how much Mexican food you've eaten. One last weird one. There was tons of pictures like this. Goblin shark. Some of those gars look kind of like you want to throw them back, but this is even worse. Apparently they stay so far under the water that, you know, people don't, you know, they never mess with humans and stuff. But that was kind of interesting. Diversity of life. Is God not creative? There's a delicate balance in life, in the universe, and in our planet. I'm going to talk about the universe later, but in our planet, just at one time I thought I would go into this, but I'm not. We all know that there's a lot of systems that make our Earth habitable and sustain life. You know, water, rain, it's going to run to a river, it's going to go out in the ocean, it's going to evaporate, and you know, that cycle. And there's all sorts of cycles. Our ozone layer, you know, it gets damaged for a while, but then it rebuilds itself back up. Not by the help of science. God created it to do that, you know. And so there's lots of things that our planet is amazing that it sustains life. And that happened by accident. And consider all the systems in our own bodies. You know, your epidermis, your skin, keeps you all the homeostasis. That's when your body stays at that same temperature all the time, you know, and just all the things that have to happen for your body to live right, work right, feel good. And every now and then something gets off and we get sick, like Brother David and Sister Lil right now. But then you heal, you get better. And I've always wondered, where does that fit in with evolution? You know, if it's survival of the fittest, and if Larry's sick, just get out of the gene pool, because we don't need your kind around here, you know? It doesn't seem to healing, you know, but God made our bodies to regenerate, to heal. Some lizards grow back tails, but we know somebody who used to be around here who could have grown back some fingers, and he would have been an even better woodworker. But symbiotic relationships in nature. Now, not all of them are mutually beneficial. There's different kinds of these relationships, but isn't it cool that God told birds you can go clean out the mouth of an alligator and he won't eat you? Or the water buffalo and those birds, and you know, bees and flowers and honey. It's good for the flowers. It's good for the bees and it's. And I don't even know what the clownfish do, but they help the sea enemy, I guess. But there's all these kinds of these things in nature. And like not all of them are mutually beneficial. Mosquitoes bite us and take our blood, and it does us absolutely no good. In fact, that's how many diseases are spread. So I'm not sure what God was thinking when he did that, but I'm sure there's reasons. Or it happened since the fall of man and when sin, yeah. So anyway, the delicate balance of life in the universe. I said I'd get back to this. Stephen Hawking observed, the laws of science as we know them at present contain many fundamental numbers, like the size of the electric charge of the electron and the ratio of the masses of the proton and the electron. The remarkable fact is that these values of these numbers seem to have been finely tuned, finally adjusted to make possible the development of life. Now, doesn't it sound like he's talking about intelligent design? He doesn't want to. But that little thing is the Kepler telescope. We launched it back in, I think, 2009. Its mission was to go out, boldly go where no man has gone before, and look for planets that are inhabitable in our solar system only. It found 50 million exoplanets. They define an exoplanet as a planet that orbits a sun, because to have life, it's going to have to orbit a sun. So there's no sense in looking at planets that don't orbit the sun. But of all of the, I don't know, millions and billions probably of planets and stars in our solar system, it found 50 million of them that potentially could have life. But it found life on none of them. Well, because God created Earth for us, you know. But it's pretty fascinating. I even read somewhere that even the shape of our galaxy, the spiral shape, the spiral galaxy, that's the kind of galaxies, many of the other, you've seen the pictures that come back from the Hubble telescope and stuff, and some of those galaxies are really fascinating looking. But most of them, I don't particularly understand why, but they would not support life in those galaxies. That spiraling effect somehow they think is important. How they know all this stuff, I don't know. Okay, but let me give you a few just big picture observations of science from a non-science perspective. Just a farm boy from Kansas, and this is some things that I think. Too long under the microscope. You can spend too long peering in the microscope, and you can lose things. You can forget the big picture. In my job, what I do for a living, I have to be concerned about details. My wife says that I'm not, but that's because when I come home, I'm done with details. But in my role as a supervisor of designers, I have to be good at keeping the big picture in mind. And I have to say, okay, you're getting lost. You're getting lost in the details. This is our big picture. You're chasing down things that don't matter. Sometimes we like to say at work, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. You know, you're chasing something that's law of diminishing returns. Stop it. You know, get back to the big picture. Remember where we're going. So I've always kind of been able to look at the details, but also able to remember the big picture. I'm kind of more of a big picture guy than I am a detail guy. But let me give you why I'm using that skill, looking at all the things that I've looked at in science, because I'm not a scientist. Remember me using the term self-evident? Thomas Jefferson wrote it in our Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Self-evident used to be acceptable. What is self-evident? Well, like I said, I'm a farm boy from Kansas. Self-evident is kind of like, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it's probably a duck. But self-evident has kind of lost its acceptance. But back when many of the science fathers, Kepling and, drawing blanks, but, Newton, all of those science fathers, fathers of their field, they were God-fearing people. And many of them used their knowledge of the Bible and their understanding of God and discovered the things that would become, the laws of thermodynamics and the laws of gravity and motion and all of these things. They were God-fearing people who used their intellect that came from God to search out the wonders of the world, and science is still benefiting from their work, and they feared God. Self-evident to them was acceptable. There was a time self-evident was still acceptable. But we've kind of lost that. But as a people, it's kind of like we've hit our rebellious teenage years. Around the transition from the 19th to the 20th century, we had Renaissance authors. If you don't remember, they pushed the boundaries of things. We reached the Victorian age and the industrial age, and we thought we were getting really smart, just kind of like teenagers do when they know more than their parents. My sister and I never really reached that stage. But that's a common progression. You learn a lot, and then you start to question. And you know what? I've heard smart people answer every question and question every answer. Okay, that's good. God is not afraid of questions. Okay? So it's okay to do that. Just use some God-given smarts and accept some self-evidence. Anyway, through those times, those time periods, the Renaissance, the Victorian age, the industrial age, and we kind of just got too smart for our britches kind of thing. We self-evidence was no longer good. We needed something else. Come on. But like I said, that's okay to some extent. Here's a strange saying for you: science kills gods. I borrowed this from John Lennox. He's a really smart guy, way smarter than I am. Okay, come on. Remember all the ancient Roman gods? The Greek gods, the Roman gods, the Egyptian gods. Wasn't Ra the god of the sun, and Thor the god of lightning? I don't know. I'm not really into that stuff. But you know what they were? They were gods of the gaps. Whenever they didn't understand something, like where does lightning come from? Well, so you make a god of lightning. What's the sun? What is that? So you have a god of the sun. So whenever you don't understand something, you make a god with the little g because you don't understand it. Well, science can kill gods. As we grow to understand, as we learn what causes the lightning, we no longer need the god. Science buries the gods with little g's. Does that make sense? I think it does. So when Richard Dawkins says you must choose between God and science, he just had a capitalization problem. Yeah, science will kill the little gods, the gods that we make when we don't understand. But the God of the Bible is the creator of it all. Space, time, matter, energy, force. I forget the name of the British scientist who identified those 5 factors, elements of physics. Those are the basic 5 ingredients for all physical things: space, time, matter, energy, and force. In the beginning, there's time, God. It's energy or force? God created, there's energy and force right there together. The heavens, that's space, and the earth, that's matter. Perfect scientific statement right there. But God, the God of the Bible, is the creator of it all. So, I did that already. in the words of John Lennox, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. That includes the bits you understand and the bits that you don't. So the things that we don't understand, we don't need a little God for. We still have the God who created heaven and earth. So when you know that God created the heavens and that the heavens are the heavens of God, understanding how the lightning is formed in the heavens does not in one bit diminish the God who created the heavens, right? So science can kill the little gods, but not the capital letter God, right? Now, prior to the 1900s, most scientists believed that the universe was eternal. This thing cut out. The universe was eternal. It was always there. They believed that that was their kind of common core belief. But when Einstein was working on his theory of general relativity, he produced the thought that the universe had a definite beginning. Mathematically, the universe, space, time, and matter had a beginning, and that the universe was expanding. But he didn't want to believe that. So he wrote into his theory of relativity a fudge factor, because he didn't want there to be a beginning, because that means he's got another problem to solve. How did it begin? So he wrote in this fudge factor that he called the cosmological constant, because he wanted the universe to be eternal, but matter was just always there. So in 1931, when Edwin Hubble invited him to look through his telescope and observe that the world, that the universe is indeed expanding, after looking, Albert said that the cosmological constant was the biggest mistake of his career. The universe did have a beginning. And now all that I'm interested in is to find the mind of God. Everything else is details. Now, that is not to say that Albert Einstein necessarily became a Christian. I don't know that. But what I do know is that he was convinced the universe has a beginning. Space, time, matter, they began somehow. And I can't explain that, but God probably can. So he wanted to get in the mind of God because he wanted to know, where did it all come from? So then a little later on, Stephen Hawking began to study. In 1960, he studied what he would call black hole physics. He would go on to say that almost everyone believes now that the universe had a beginning. The only question is, what caused its beginning? And you've heard about the Big Bang. And then we like to say God spoke and bang, it happened. But everything that he was learning kept pointing to this singular creation event. If you know about Stephen Hawking, he wrote the book, The God Delusion. He's not looking to find that there's a God. So this is a problem for him. But everything he's learning keeps pointing to a singular creation event. And to keep that from being the explanation, he developed a theory of quantum cosmology. But that theory also really didn't solve the problem, and the math always keeps coming back to the point the universe has a beginning. They don't like this. They don't like this. Move on. Another theory developed to avoid the creation event, and that was the multiverse generator. I'm sure you've heard multiverse in movies. Hollywood loves multiverse, but it's just not very practical, and it's even harder to believe. If you have one universe that looks like it has a definite beginning, how could you have, others? Won't they also need to have a definite beginning? And besides, we sent our Kepler telescope out, and we found that out of 50 million exoplanets, none of them had life on it. So what are the chances of finding any more? Anyway, so an agnostic astronomer named Paul Davies, we need to stop talking about the multiverse. The multiverse is a dodge. Nobody would be talking about other universes being out there if this universe didn't appear to be intelligently designed. That's pretty forthcoming. So this is what I see. Remember this quote? There's two ways to be fooled. One, you can believe something that isn't true, or you can refuse to believe something that is true. So science, as a non-science person, I keep hearing from you that the universe has a beginning, that everything's pointing to a singular creation event, but you just don't want to believe it. You are choosing not to believe in something that is true. I have a problem with that. All right, let me introduce you to John, because I keep talking about him, so I'm going to let you watch a little video. I think it's one that follows this up. Either that or it's starting the next section. I can't remember.
I debated Peter Singer, and I told the audience that my parents were believers. My first contact with Christianity was through my parents. And he came back and he said, well, there you are. That's my biggest objection to religion.
Is it just a coincidence that John is a Christian when his parents are Christians?
And I thought, this is going to be real fun. When I got the opportunity to speak, I said, Peter, I told people honestly where I'm coming from, but you didn't. Peter, can I ask you, were your parents atheists? He said, yes, they were. Oh, I said, so you have remained in the faith in which you were brought up?
It's not a faith, in my view.
Oh, of course it's a faith. Don't you believe it? And cyberspace went mad at that point. Here's one of the world's most famous philosophers from Princeton, and he doesn't see that his atheism is a belief system.
That's kind of on point, isn't it? So these Dawkins and Hawkins and even Einstein, incredibly smart people, 10 times smarter than I am, and they keep coming back to, it really looks like the universe had a definite beginning, but I don't want it to be that way, so I'm working my theory around that to where it doesn't have to be that way. They're following their belief system, are they not? Okay. That's not there by accident. My granddaughter drew these. Just for the sake of argument, let's say the one on the left she drew when she was 3. I don't know if that's exactly right or not. The one in the middle she drew when she was 4. And let's say the one on the right's the most recent that she drew when she was 5. You can see the development there, right? The one on the left, it's unintelligible, right? Would you say it's random? Well, the crayon didn't fall out of the box and do this. It's not really random. Is it unintelligible? Yes, it's unintelligible. You can't tell what's going on in her mind. She's just learning general large function motor skills, probably even learning which hand feels more comfortable to hold the crayon with, right? Those are the things she's learning. The one in the middle, you can tell that she has something in her mind that she's trying to get on the paper. By the time you get to the last picture, you see some letters, and you see some other pictures, and the things that look like little squiggly lines probably aren't ocean waves. Just because I know her, and I know that when she was little, she would talk nonstop. She didn't know any words, but boy, she was telling you something, and it just came pouring out, and I'm right, aren't I? You know, she would, not knowing words to say did not keep her from wanting to tell you something. Okay? So I think she ran out of letters, so she thought, I'll just scribble this, and I'm still writing something. That's what I think, okay? Why am I showing you this? Well, you see the progression. You can tell that by the time you get to the picture on the right, the 5-year-old picture, that there's things happening in her mind that she's wanting to communicate in writing. What do you see here? supposedly that top bar is Egyptian hieroglyphics. I don't know. Well, the second one is Chinese and Arabic. I told you Arabic was a difficult language, not that I know any of it, but even at the time that Muhammad was receiving the Quran, he couldn't read because almost all Arabic-speaking people were illiterate. The language, as a written language, was very, very new. I think the last one was Danish. Believe it or not, those sentences all say the same thing. It says, the army of the king now on look with his majesty. I don't know. I'm just illustrating, even if we don't understand it, we know it's language, right? Somebody is communicating something with these scratches, these letters. Our English looks just as foreign to the Danish as the Danish looks to us. But language always requires a mind, right? Now, DNA is a language. And I think I have John Lennox next.
Genome, the DNA molecule, is an information-bearing molecule. Look up there, EXIT. You see 4 letters. You know that has a meaning. And you will deduce immediately that whatever physical processes went into producing that, there's a mind behind it. And yet, some of my colleagues can look at the DNA molecule with the word 3.4 billion letters long and say it was chance and the laws of nature. You know, I say to them, tell me the origin of what you do science with, your brain or your mind. And they say, well, the brain is the end product of a mindless, unguided process. And I smile at them and I say, and you trust it? Tell me honestly, if you knew that your computer that you're going to use tomorrow in your lab was the end product of an unguided, mindless process, would you trust it? And from every scientist I've asked that question, with hesitation, I've had the answer, no, I would not. And I said, I see you have a problem.
DNA, I think he said a word that's like 3.4 million or billion. I don't remember now what he said. Sometimes those large numbers after a certain point get kind of meaningless. But incredible information in DNA. And even the simplest little mitochondria, single-cell organisms, they have DNA that is extremely complex, maybe not as complex as ours, but still extremely complex. And how to have language that complex and not have an intelligent mind behind it makes absolutely zero sense, right? So here are the problems with random chance and the laws of nature, like he said. You know, the mind is just the what do you say? It's just the random chance and laws of nature that made your mind. Really? Well, here's the problems with, or some problems with, random chance and laws of nature to explain how we get DNA and our minds. Order requires a mind if it's to be intelligible. Remember the scribbles? They weren't intelligible. They weren't random, but they were not intelligible. It was scribble. I'm just figuring out how to move this thing around and hold the paper down. And you got scribbles. But the order comes from a mind if it's to be intelligible. So even in the 5-year-old drawings that I showed you, you could tell that there's a mind there learning and putting things together, trying to communicate something. So order requires a mind if it's to be intelligible by someone else. Random may be in order, but it's not intelligible. Right? Okay. Okay, life never comes from non-life. That's a problem. Buy a deck of cards. And I almost brought a deck of cards in here, but some people think that that might be evil. So I didn't actually do it. But if I bought a brand new deck of cards and you took them out of the box, you would expect them to be in order, right? Because they do that. If you've never bought a deck of cards, I'll just tell you. They're in order: ace, king, queen. In hearts, ace, king, queen, and so forth. Then you get to spades. They come in order. But if I were to take those 52 cards and throw them up in the air, what are the chances that they land back in order? And that's not. But scientists will say, but you do this over billions and billions of years. I don't have that long, but I'm pretty certain it's never going to happen. Never going to happen. Never going to fall in that same order. And so for science to expect us to believe that one little happy accident once in a billion years created life out of non-life, now you have a ticking clock, right? It's like it's got to reproduce or it's done, right? So it's hard. So no matter how many millions and billions of years you have, once you have these jumps in creation and your evolution, it's like now you've got a clicking clock. Did I say that right? A clock that's ticking. And so you have a time problem now. I mean, you can't just always say billions and billions of years. But when you see order in something, it's perfectly self-evident to believe that a creative, intelligent mind was behind the order. It is just self-evident. Grok doesn't think that there's any chance that the cards will ever land. And who's Grok? Grok is Elon Musk's AI bot, and I think it's Grok 4 is the latest one that they say has the PhD level knowledge of every degree that there is out there. So watch this. This is going to be from what's his name? Ken Ham from Answers in Genesis. And this is just the short version, but just take a listen. Well, no, I'll tell you what he's going to do first. He takes the time to tell Grok, forget the nonsense answers. Only answer me with mathematical probability, observable science, and strict logic. That's all I want. And he begins to ask questions. And using those parameters, this is what he gets Grok to admit to.
So, according to strict logic, mathematical probability, and observational science, we observe incredible design in living things. What is the most logical conclusion as to where life came from and the biodiversity on the planet?
The most logical conclusion, based on strict logic, mathematical probability, and observational science, is a directed process implying a purposeful, intelligent design. As undirected evolutionary processes are effectively impossible, probabilities less than 1 in 10 to the power 200 for abiogenesis, 1 in 10 to the power 600 for new genes, and the intricate, functional design of living things suggests intent.
Now, what's interesting when he did this, if you look it up, which actually I think that's the name of, if you want to search for that, you could see the whole discussion there. It's about 18 minutes long. But after he tells Grok the parameters to use in its answers, this is what it said. He even got it to admit, so the Bible does seem to be the most logical explanation of the origin of the universe. In the beginning, God created. And Grok says that. That seems to be a logical conclusion. And then he tells Grok, okay, now forget we've had these conversations. I'm a new user. You've never heard from me before. Now just give me your common answers, the answers like you're programmed. And he asks, so where does life come from? And you get the answers that you would read in textbooks in school. That, the general science explanation is evolution and stuff like this. So I just found that interesting, but you can check that out yourself. Okay, I have a number of slides here. I may go through them real quickly. I may not read all of them. I think I'll probably just read the headlines. But if somebody wants to watch later, you would probably have time to read them. I didn't take all of them, but I just took some of the better ones. Things that the Bible says about science that are true. And remember that when the Bible was written, and a whole lot of them come from Job, which we consider to be the oldest book in the Old Testament, written 1,500 years. 1,500 years is a long time before Christ, or before Common Era, if you prefer. But until modern times, I guess, they supposedly used to believe lots of weird things about where the earth, but the Bible says the earth hangs upon nothing. And when Job wrote that, excuse me, or if Moses wrote it for him, I'm not sure. But when that was written, they didn't understand how that was. But the Bible declared it. Okay, cloud balancing. Dost thou know the balancing of the clouds? Clouds are formed in the air, balanced by two forces, gravity pulling them downwards, warm air pushing them upwards. How did Job know about this? I love the book of Job, really. A very great number of stars. I can't pronounce that guy's name, Ptolemy, in 150 AD. He dogmatically insisted that there are 1,056 stars. He counted them one night, I guess, on a very clear night. He counted them. But the Bible declared long before that in Jeremiah that the hosts of the heavens cannot be numbered. And also he, God, telleth the number of stars. He knows the number of stars, in other words, and he calls them by name. And scientists today tell us that the estimates are around 200 million stars just in our Milky Way galaxy, and who knows if that's right. That's a very rough guesstimate. One thing I know in my profession, when you estimate something, you use very round numbers, and that's just a clue to you that it's an estimate. Okay, all right. This is interesting. I don't know much about constellations, but the Pleiades constellation is a bound cluster, not breaking up. Canst thou bind the sweet influences, or cluster, I guess is another way to interpret that word that comes from the Hebrew, of Pleiades. So apparently Job knew about, or actually, maybe he didn't, but God told him, write this down. But, 1,500 years before, God said that Pleiades is a star cluster, and it's bound together. Fascinating. How could Job know that? He didn't even have a telescope. Orion's bands are loosed. Canst thou loose the bands of Orion? Again from Job. So the constellation of Orion is a star system that is steadily expanding outward. So it's moving. So here you have the Bible telling the difference between two star systems. The one that's bound and one that's loosed. You can't get that from just looking at the stars and with the naked eye. So the Bible declared these things long before we ever knew it. The spherical earth. It is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth, from Isaiah. Another one, when he said a compass, circle. Same Hebrew word from what I understand. Anyway, at the time they thought the earth was flat, and a circle can be flat. I've heard some say that word, Hebrew word, can be interpreted sphere, but I didn't find it in Strong's, so I don't know. But anyway, now it's gone. All mankind came from one woman. Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. DNA is found in every cell, even both the nucleus and the mitochondria. Mitochondrial DNA is always and only inherited from the mother. An analysis of this DNA in humans from all over the world shows unmistakably that all humans have inherited from one woman. There's the research that you can look that up. Now, it's complicated. I did some other research to, check the research against other research, And even the Answers in Genesis guy was a little bit, they can't disprove that it all comes from one mother, but it also sometimes looks a little bit like it came from, 4 or 5. But think about it. There's 2 times that the Bible tells us that the earth was inhabited from, Adam and Eve, but then after the flood. It takes the time to say all the earth was inhabited from Noah, Shum, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. So there you have another event in the Bible where all the earth was populated from those 4 or 3. I don't know if Noah had other kids after that. I don't remember. But from those few gene lines, you have all the earth being populated. So whether it really comes from all one, ultimately it will come from one source, or if it looks like it comes from the 3, it still fits the Bible narrative. So I'm happy either way. The bloodstream carries life. The life of the flesh is in the blood. And Leviticus, I don't remember when that was written, but a long time before we had the ability to look under a microscope and look at blood. But can you believe that from 400 BC to 1900 AD that they did bloodletting? I mean, it seems barbaric to us, right? But it was not that long ago that they still thought bloodletting, letting out the bad blood, would make you better. And it killed millions of people. Well, the Bible, if they were paid attention to the Bible, they would have read, life is in the blood. You want to keep that inside you. And I remember when I was teaching on depression and overcoming depression, I remember looking at all the scriptures that talk about, a broken spirit dries up the bones, and different scriptures. And the more I studied those things, the more I was like, there has to be a connection between bone marrow and mental health. I didn't know what it was, but I saw it in the Bible. I know there has to be a connection. And then I discovered, I don't remember which university, but they did a study on these, I don't remember if it's mice or rats, but they let them in these mazes, and they drive each other crazy after a while. And they really did. They would pull out all their hair and stuff. It's like, if you get too many people in the same room and don't let them out once in a while, they'll drive each other crazy. And that's kind of what was happening to these mice and these rats. But they gave them blood transfusions, and it cleared up that mental degradation that caused them to be crazy. Fresh blood. And they did more research. And in your bones, the marrow that's produced feeds the medulla where, what's the neurological phone? Huh? No, the happy, who said what? No, the dopamine. So dopamine is produced, I think it's produced in the medulla, and your bone marrow supplies the nutrients for that to happen. So there is a connection between bone marrow and mental health. And it's in the Bible, more or less. I think that's, one more. When we talked about Israel as evidence for God, the law that God gave Moses, protecting them, in the Mosaic laws, don't eat pork, quarantining for leprosy, all the sanitation, the washing. To all the other nations in the world at the time, that was just kind of foolish. They didn't understand, but God knew. So in the Bible, long before we knew any of that stuff, and I'm cutting out again, but long before we knew anything, it's in the Bible. fountains. This was one of my favorite ones. I'm almost done. Fountains under the sea. Guy who read this, hast thou entered the springs of the sea? No, not this one. That's the next one. Sorry. There's at least 10,000 unknown water volcanoes. I didn't know that. That adds extra water to the oceans. But the Bible knew it. Job knew it. Well, Job didn't know it, but Job wrote it down when God said so. This is the one I was talking about. The sea paths and the ocean currents. Whatsoever passes through the paths of the sea, and these paths, in Hebrews, that means roads, customary roads. Matthew Murray is the father of oceanography. And a statue of him exists in Virginia with charts of the sea in one hand and a Bible in the other. Until Murray's work, there were no charts of sailing lanes. But reading from Psalms 8, he said, that's enough. If the Word of God says it, it must be true. And he went out and discovered the sea lanes. I just love it. I love that story. The winds have weight and air pressure. We know about barometric pressure, and Galileo discovered things about it, but the Bible made mention to make weight for the winds. Now I'm done. Anyway, all that to say, there's a lot more science in the Bible that we really don't quite understand, but it seems to me like scientists are refusing to accept the solutions that seem clear to them and look for other solutions. 2 ways to be fooled. Anyway. Now that's all I got tonight. I ran a little bit over, but we got it finished. So next week we can talk about the resurrection as evidence for God, which is so very fitting as we approach the Resurrection Sunday in a few more weeks. So that one I'll enjoy presenting a lot more, I'm sure. But anyway, well, thank you, and good night, and the Lord bless you all. Oh, yes? Time change this weekend, yeah. Spring forward. Thank you for reminding us, yeah. Yeah. All right.